If you're looking for the operating manual for complex life on Earth, you might need to forget the simplistic narratives, the ones about constant brutal war. Welcome to the deep dive. Our sources today, a whole stack of ecology, systems theory, and specialized biology papers,
Yeah.
they reveal that beneath the surface of the planet, where competition should be at its absolute fiercest, something far more counterintuitive is going on.
It really is the ultimate evolutionary paradox. We're all trained to view plants through that zero-sum Darwinian lens.
The fastest, the tallest.
Exactly. The faster, the taller, the deeper-rooted plant wins. But the systems we're examining today, they reveal that the end goal isn't really victory over a rival.
It's something else.
It's persistence with the rival. Our mission here is to really unpack the source material and challenge that core assumption that competition represents the final, stable state of plant survival.
Exactly. And the initial facts just set up this stunning problem. I mean, you think about the astounding biological density, especially somewhere like a tropical forest.
The numbers are incredible.
The sources confirm that a single square meter of forest floor can be home to the root systems of over 200 distinct plant species.
200.
All drawing on the same finite water table, competing for the same mineral ions, vying for the same fleeting light. I mean, according to the classical models of competitive exclusion, that should just result in utter collapse.
Or at least monopolization by a few really aggressive species.
Right.
But that's not what we see. That maximum biodiversity persists, and often across millions of years, which, stabilizes the entire global ecosystem.
So that persistence, the ability to fit all that functional differentiation into such a minimal space, that's the real achievement here.
That is the ultimate systemic achievement. So we are moving well beyond simple tolerance today. We're going into active, sophisticated strategies of coexistence. I'm talking network governance, regulated exchange, non-conscious decision-making.
For those of you comfortable with advanced systems ecology and complex biological processes, this deep dive is really about understanding the functional infrastructure of cooperation itself. Okay, let's unpack this. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because, they didn't start out cooperating, did they? They were forced into it.
They were forced into it by the very success of competition itself. We have to begin with the classical conflict, the vast open frontier. We're talking about 470 million years ago.
Wow.
When the first, primitive vascular plants started colonizing the land, space was, for all intents and purposes, functionally infinite. A pioneer organism, maybe a liverwort or a creeping moss, it only had to deal with abiotic factors.
Weather, geology, gravity.
Right, but biological success is, it's inherently a self-limiting factor.
Of course.
As those pioneers radiated out and diversified and became really successful reproducers, they inevitably started running into their neighbors.
And the crucial difference between plants and most animals is that they can't move.
They're rooted. Exactly. They cannot move to find resources or, flee when resources become scarce.
So that non-motility, that's what forced the evolution of these pure competitive traits. Yeah. The ones designed to just win the local resource war.
And that's where we see the development of massive, light-monopolizing leaves designed to shade out competitors. We see the evolution of specialized root structures aimed at quickly capturing water or mining deep-seated minerals.
And of course, the beginning of chemical warfare.
Oh, yeah. Producing toxic sap, thorns, complex defensive alkaloids. This is pure Darwinian survival of the fittest at its most intense. It shaped the morphology we see today.
And that kind of intensive specialization is really efficient in the short term, right? It drives incredible adaptation.
It does.
But the source material really highlights this devastating systemic limitation that's just inherent in that ruthless, purely extractive approach. There's an edge.
The edge. It's a critical threshold where maximizing your competitive efficiency actually starts contributing to the decline of the entire system that supports you.
It's the ecological equivalent of, what, eating your own seed corn.
Precisely. And we see clear, quantifiable examples of this self-destruction in mature ecosystems. I just consider height competition.
A race for light.
The race for light. Trees that invest enormous structural energy just to maintain dominance and monopolize that light. Well, they have to divert a disproportionate amount of their photosynthate, their fixed carbon, into just maintenance, not defense, not reproduction.
Which means they become biomechanically brittle.
Exactly. They are incredibly vulnerable to external shocks. The sources detail how these hyperdominant species, while they're winning the light war, they become systemically weak.
Vulnerable to high winds, specialized insect pathogens.
Or catastrophic crown dieback. The cost of maintaining that dominance actually exceeds the ecological return on the investment, and that leads to localized collapse.
And this extends underground, too. I mean, plants that deploy really effective allelopathic chemicals, poisons, to suppress their rivals.
They often end up contaminating and degrading the very soil matrix they rely on. They disrupt their symbiotic relationship with necessary microbes and degrade the common resource pool. It's a losing game.
And the roots themselves. If they become hyper-efficient at stripping the soil of every last usable mineral, ion, potassium, phosphorus, you name it, they starve the essential microbial decomposers and the fungal networks.
And those microbes are the planet's recyclers. They're required to break down organic matter and replenish those very same mineral ions in the long term.
So winning the immediate resource battle guarantees long-term systemic malnutrition. It's a dead end.
So after millions of years of iterating on this competitive strategy, the system just kept encountering these hard crashes. It confirmed that unrestrained competitive success leads to systemic fragility.
And evolution, in essence, found that edge and then it pivoted.
It pivoted, and it started adopting strategies that valued collective stability over individual dominance.
That pivot is where this story just shifts dramatically.
Mm.
It's the realization that cooperation isn't some, nice idea. It's an evolved survival strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we have to look at the groundbreaking work of ecologist Suzanne Simard at the University of British Columbia, which has, it's fundamentally reframed forest ecology over the last few decades.
It really has. Simard's research demonstrates pretty unequivocally that cooperation, in this context, it evolved because it directly solved the systemic problem of competitive fragility and the subsequent collapse. The cost of sharing, as we'll keep saying, it proved to be an effective form of ecosystem insurance. So once cooperation becomes a viable evolutionary strategy, the immediate question is, well, how do you physically manage the increasing population density?
Right.
And this leads us to what ecologists call the packing problem.
How do you fit the maximum number of species into the minimum amount of space without them all killing each other?
Exactly. If you cannot simply overwhelm your neighbors, you have to become functionally differentiated.
And this concept is known as niche partitioning. For our audience, the goal isn't just to be different, right? It's to partition the hyperdimensional resource space.
The environmental variables, the timing, the physical location.
So that the critical overlap between any two species is minimal enough to allow for stable coexistence.
And the first, most obvious solution is spatial partitioning. You divide the physical, three-dimensional environment based on specialized resource requirements. We can see this really clearly in the vertical dimension. Just take the structure of a mature tropical canopy.
Okay, so think of a single massive tree trunk. It isn't just one organism. It's a living skyscraper.
Good analogy.
And it's supporting an entire miniature ecosystem of epiphytes plants that grow on other plants. And they exhibit this profound vertical niche differentiation.
So, for instance, you have species of orchids, which require extremely bright, intense light and are adapted to rapid drying cycles. They position themselves way up high, often on the outermost limbs.
Whereas various species of ferns, which need that highly filtered, moderate light and consistent moisture, they cluster in the mid-canopy or on the main trunk.
And then right near the base, where light intensity is lowest but the dampness is maximized, you find specialized mosses and liverworts.
So they're all using the same host tree as an anchor, but they've successfully subdivided the resources of light, moisture, and airflow into distinct zones. It minimizes the competitive pressure.
And that spatial division also extends downwards, deep into the soil matrix itself, through root depth specialization.
Right, so you have shallow-rooted species, which often have these high physiological growth rates. They spread out laterally to catch surface rainwater and the easily available surface nutrients before they can percolate deeper.
Meanwhile, other species evolve these specialized taproots or deeply exploring lateral roots that target different strata entirely.
They might send roots down 10, 20, even 50 feet.
50 feet, yeah. Tapping into deeper, more stable phreatic water tables or sequestering minerals that are tightly bound to deeper clay layers. They're all mining the same total soil volume, but by operating at different resource strata, they achieve functional separation.
They reduce that destructive root-to-root antagonism.
Exactly.
But niche partitioning isn't just about location, it's also about timing. And this brings us to temporal partitioning.
Using the same physical space, but operating in sequential shifts. A beautiful example of this is in a temperate meadow, or the understory of a deciduous forest.
Okay.
We see plants that are highly adapted to these flash-in-the-pan resource windows. They germinate, grow rapidly, complete their flowering and fruiting cycles, and then go into deep dormancy.
And this is all happening within, what, a period of 6 to 8 weeks?
Sometimes, yeah,
Yeah.
entirely before the main canopy trees even leaf out in late spring. They are optimizing for extremely high light and that early meltwater availability.
And crucially, the resources they consumed are recycled very quickly. While they're dormant, other species, the late summer or fall growers, can then take over the space.
Right, because the competitive pressure for light from the early bloomers has vanished. They use the meadow in sequence, which minimizes the temporal overlap for critical factors like direct light intensity and surface moisture.
This functional differentiation dividing location, composition, and time, it's absolutely crucial for fitting hundreds of species into the ecosystem.
It reduces the probability that any two species will enter into a head-to-head zero-sum competition for a prolonged period.
But here's the systemic challenge, and this is where the theory has to pivot again. Niche partitioning, no matter how elegant it is ultimately limited, right?
It is. You can only divide the resource space so finely before unavoidable resource overlap becomes inevitable, especially during times of environmental stress like a drought or extended shade.
So once that functional separation breaks down, when the overlap is total, simple, tolerance just isn't enough.
No, the system enters a really high-stakes scenario. To maintain stability, the community has to move beyond merely tolerating its neighbors and pivot toward active, subsidized resource exchange. The question then becomes, how do you manage absolute scarcity in a crowded environment?
Okay, this is where we get into some genuinely counterintuitive biology. Why would a plant, shaped by millions of years of competitive pressure, evolve a mechanism to actively support or subsidize a biological rival?
To understand the answer, we have to zoom in on the single most critical nutrient bottleneck in almost all terrestrial ecosystems.
Nitrogen.
Nitrogen. It's the currency of life. It's essential for synthesizing proteins, DNA, RNA, and most visibly chlorophyll, the very machinery of photosynthesis. Without it, life just stalls.
And the irony, as the sources detail, is that the atmosphere is this vast repository of nitrogen. It's about 78% of the air we breathe.
The technical challenge is all about bioavailability. Atmospheric nitrogen exists as diatomic nitrogen N2. To be usable by plants, that triple bond has to be broken.
A process called nitrogen fixation.
Right, and it requires an enormous input of energy and specialized biological machinery. Most plants are physiologically incapable of doing this efficiently, so they are critically nitrogen-starved. The limiting factor for growth across massive swaths of the globe is that initial energy hurdle.
So the evolutionary solution was this profound codependent partnership.
A symbiosis. Plants, primarily those in the legume family, so beans, peas, clovers, acacia, entered into a highly specialized symbiosis with specific bacteria, the rhizobia.
And the plant, a master of carbon fixation, builds these specialized root nodules that serve as anaerobic cellular factories to house the bacteria.
It's a very clean trade. The bacteria, using an enzyme complex called nitrogenase, fix the atmospheric N2 into bioavailable ammonia, which the plant rapidly absorbs.
In return, the plant supplies the bacteria with a guaranteed, readily available supply of sugar carbon generated directly from photosynthesis.
It's a closed-loop energy for fertility system, and it gives legumes a massive competitive advantage.
Now here is the crucial systemic twist that's so relevant to coexistence. That newly fixed nitrogen, it isn't sequestered exclusively within the legume's permanent biomap.
No. When the plant sheds its roots, when the specialized nodules decompose, when the plant naturally senesces and dies, all that excess, newly fixed nitrogen enters the surrounding soil.
And this nitrogen influx rapidly becomes available as fertilizer for the entire surrounding community.
Including the competitors who lack the capability for symbiotic fixation. This is active resource subsidy in action.
And the data supports the magnitude of this gift. I mean, Janet Sprent's 2024 study on nitrogen cycling quantified this. It showed that the establishment of legumes can increase localized soil nitrogen by anywhere from 50 to a staggering 200%.
The legume is functionally fertilizing its rivals. It's funding the competitive success of its neighbors.
Okay, wait, I have to challenge the logic here for a second. Given millions of years of competition, what mechanism prevents every other plant from just becoming a permanent nitrogen parasite?
That's the question.
If the cost of the legume's fixed carbon is so high, Why doesn't evolution favor a non-fixing plant that just grows next to the lagoon, benefits from the leakage, and doesn't pay the carbon cost?
That is the defining question, and it shifts the analysis from individual cost-benefit to systemic stability. The system's rationale is that in these crowded, long-lived, complex ecosystems, that seemingly generous subsidy, it's not altruism.
It's a form of functional infrastructure.
It's insurance. It's ecosystem resilience and insurance.
So if the lagoon were capable of perfectly hoarding all its fixed nitrogen and just thriving in isolation, what would be the long-term consequence?
The consequence would be localized catastrophe. The immediate surrounding community deprived of nitrogen would become nutrient poor. That reduces the overall biomass, leads to increased soil erosion,
You'd lose the diverse fungal networks that the lagoon itself relies on for water.
and you'd see a crash in the crucial pollinator and herbivore populations that contribute to genetic mixing and seed dispersal.
So the lagoon's long-term success is fundamentally tied to the health and resilience of the community around it. The fragility of a monoculture or a nitrogen-starved system poses a greater existential threat to the lagoon than the short-term cost of subsidizing its competitors.
Precisely. The cost incurred by sharing that surplus nitrogen, even 100% more, is demonstrably less than the catastrophic cost of ecosystem failure. By investing in a rich, resilient, high-diversity system, the lagoon buffers itself against long-term shocks.
Shocks like drought, widespread pest outbreaks, or rapid climate shifts.
It moves far beyond mere coexistence. This is an active investment in community persistence. All right, so once we accept that active community investment is a core survival strategy, the system then has to develop methods for governance.
Right.
If resources are costly, if you are spending a significant portion of your energy budget to sustain the community, you need some mechanism to decide who gets the resources and how they're distributed.
This requires a level of non-conscious intelligence, and it has to begin with recognition.
Which brings us back to those fascinating Douglas fir experiments conducted by Suzanne Simard. Her team used isotopic tracking specifically, introducing radioactive carbon-14 into the adult trees to see where the fixed carbon traveled through the underground network.
And what her team confirmed was that this resource transfer wasn't random.
Not at all. Adult Douglas firs preferentially allocated resources. They were observed sending significantly more carbon, sometimes 30 to 40% more, to their own genetic offspring seedlings.
Then they were sending to unrelated seedlings of the same species, growing the exact same distance away.
Which implies a chemical intelligence capable of identifying kin.
That raises a phenomenal question. How does a rooted, non-conscious organism know its relatives? It's not memory in the human sense. What are the chemical mechanics at play here?
The sources detail that the mechanism is purely chemistry. It's analogous to a highly sophisticated chemical fingerprinting system.
Okay.
Plant roots continuously exude specific chemical compounds into the soil matrix. These include various organic acids, complex sugars, and specialized proteins. And these exudates are specific to the genotype.
So when neighboring roots make contact or even just exist in the same chemical milieu, receptor proteins on their cell membranes act like non-conscious scanners.
Exactly. These receptors detect and analyze the chemical signature. If a root detects an exudate signature that correlates highly with its own, indicating high genetic similarity, it triggers a differential physiological response.
Like increased resource allocation or reduced competitive aggression.
It functions almost identically to how a primitive immune system distinguishes self from non-self, but it's applied to resource strategy.
And this is reinforced by Richard Carbon's work at UC Davis, right? Showing that sagebrush plants could chemically distinguish between siblings and strangers.
When neighboring strangers were detected, the plant ramped up its production of defensive toxins, a preemptive defensive strategy.
But if a sibling was nearby,
They exhibited more tolerance and restrained competitive growth, focusing instead on shared resource acquisition.
this preferential allocation to kin makes clear evolutionary sense. It's a strategy for maximizing the survival of shared genes, even if it comes at a short-term resource cost.
It is, but the most complex governance occurs when we shift from kin recognition to cross-species trade, which is entirely mediated by the mycorrhizal network infrastructure.
Okay, let's get deeper into these mycorrhizal networks. This ancient partnership between plant roots and fungi that has existed for over 400 million years.
This network isn't just a communication channel. It is the physical infrastructure for a decentralized economy. A single fungal mycelium can connect hundreds of different plant species.
A diverse array of ages, nutrient demands, competitive capacities, all linked into one massive grid.
And the functional necessity of the fungus is its capacity for resource mining, particularly for elements like phosphorus, which is often locked up in the soil in forms that plant root hairs can't directly access.
But the fungus, with its incredibly fine filaments and specialized enzymes, it acts as an advanced molecular extractor.
And the plant pays an enormous price for this service. The sources indicate that a plant may dedicate anywhere from 10 to 30% of its total fixed carbon from photosynthesis pure sugar energy just to feeding the fungus.
So the relationship is metabolically expensive. It must demand extremely efficient governance to prevent exploitation.
Which brings us to the question, how does the system enforce fair trade? This is where Toby Keith's 2025 research on network governance is so illuminating. His work revealed that the fungi are far from being passive conduits.
They're not just pipes.
They actively regulate the resource flow. They operate a dynamic, self-regulating market economy.
Oh.
Keith found that the fungus allocates more critical nutrients like phosphorus and bioavailable water specifically toward the plants that provide a greater quantity or a higher quality of fixed carbon.
So it directs its infrastructural investment toward the most productive, most cooperative partners in the network.
It's not a one-way street, it's a measurable reciprocal market.
I can see how that enforces basic productivity, but what about the buffering capacity? What if a dominant tree is suddenly shaded by a windthrow event or struck by disease? Does the network immediately punish it by cutting off its nutrient supply?
No, and that's the sign of systemic intelligence. The network exhibits memory and buffering capacity. A stressed or temporarily low-producing plant is not instantly penalized.
Okay.
The fungi, they understand that environmental conditions fluctuate and that redundancy is key. So they support the stressed organism for a period, banking on its long-term recovery.
So the stability of the entire network is prioritized over short-term transactional efficiency. But what about the true defectors? What prevents a plant from simply taking resources without fulfilling its carbon commitment and becoming a permanent cheater?
The network enforces reciprocity through measured, escalating responses. If a plant consistently defects, if it becomes parasitic over a sustained period, the fungi respond by reducing nutrient flow.
And in extreme cases?
In extreme cases, they may sever the connection entirely. They reallocate the infrastructural capacity, the fungal threads, toward more reliable, cooperative partners.
That is a fascinating enforcement mechanism. It externalizes the cost of punishment. The fungus, which is itself non-conscious, acts as the regulator.
It ensures that individual short-term defection is a losing strategy in the long-term iterated game. The overall objective is clear. The fungal network invests in the redundancy and stability of the entire community because a diverse, stable community offers the fungus the greatest long-term access to diverse carbon sources.
So the infrastructure of the mycorrhizal network and the use of root exudates, they allow plants to exchange far more than just resources. They facilitate the sharing of critical, time-sensitive, actionable intelligence.
Exactly. We're moving beyond resource economics into distributed information processing.
Plants are constantly broadcasting and receiving information, not just through the hydraulic connections of the fungal network, but via volatile organic compounds, VOCs, released into the air.
And these airborne chemicals form a chemical commons, a shared informational space available to the entire local community.
The most famous evidence of this non-conscious collective defense goes way back to the 1983 willow tree discovery by Rhodes and Orions. They found that when specific willow trees were attacked by caterpillars nearby, undamaged willow trees and, critically, sometimes even other neighboring species began ramping up their production of defensive chemicals, preemptively.
And this chemical signal cascade is highly complex. The initial trigger from the insect attack causes a massive localized spike in the plant hormone jasmonic acid.
And that spike acts like a master switch.
It initiates the synthesis of various defensive compounds, alkaloids, toxic tannins, protease inhibitors that make the leaves either indigestible or outright poisonous to the herbivore.
But the key to communication is the volatility. Along with these internal defensive compounds, the damaged plant synthesizes specific volatile organic compounds.
Hydrocarbons like green leaf volatiles, or aromatics like methyl salicylate. When we smell freshly cut grass, what we're actually smelling is a massive, immediate chemical distress signal being broadcast to the environment.
And those VOCs are the actionable intelligence.
Right. Neighboring plants possess specialized receptor proteins capable of detecting and identifying these airborne chemical blends. When a receiving plant detects the distress signal, which is calibrated to indicate a specific type of attack, say insect chewing versus mechanical damage, it can activate its own defensive pathways
Before the herbivores even arrive.
before they arrive.
And this preemptive strategy, it must drastically optimize the energy cost of defense. Richard Carbon's 2024 work on sagebrush showed that plants that successfully received and acted on these aerial warning signals suffered 50% less herbivore damage than plants that were artificially shielded.
That's a huge difference. They avoided the full metabolic burden of continuous high-level defense, only deploying it when the threat was imminent and confirmed.
This creates a net positive benefit for the entire local community then.
It does. By collectively ramping up defenses, they make the local area far less appealing to the herbivore population, which reduces overall pressure. This benefits the signaler by reducing the likelihood of subsequent attacks, and it benefits the receivers through reduced immediate damage.
But wait, doesn't this hyper-efficiency create an equally hyper-efficient opportunity for exploitation? I mean, the chemical commons is, by definition, an open information network.
A very good point.
If plants are signaling their health or their distress, how do we know the system isn't constantly being abused?
That is the crucial tension. It's the evolutionary arms race that exists within the chemical commons. And specialized parasites have indeed evolved to eavesdrop on this vital communication.
Turning the distress signal into a dinner bell.
Exactly. The prime example is Cuscuta species, or dodder, a parasitic vine with no roots and no chlorophyll, relying entirely on theft.
Right?
Consul de Marias at Penn State confirmed that germinating dodder seedlings actively detect the specific chemical blend of VOCs released by nearby host plants.
And crucially, the dodder doesn't just find a host.
No, it uses the chemical advertisement to locate and select the most nutritious host. It favors high-value targets like tomato plants over, say, lower nutrient grasses.
So the plant's advertisement of its health, intended as a warning, is exploited by the specialized parasite for efficient resource location.
It's an ongoing pressure system. Plants that signal too loudly risk becoming targets, but plants that go completely silent lose the collective benefit of community defense.
Which results in an evolutionary equilibrium where signaling persists.
Because the collective benefits, the widespread reduction in herbivory, generally outweigh the risks of being exploited by a small cadre of specialized, hyper-adapted parasites. It ensures that information sharing remains a core, stable feature of coexistence. Our discussion so far is focused on strategies that are active at a single point in time, but plant communities also manage coexistence by sharing space sequentially,
Moving through time via the dynamic process of ecological succession.
where the early species actively create the necessary conditions, the platform for the later species.
So in recently disturbed or abandoned land, the initial stages of succession are often characterized by pure, raw competition and high hostility.
Exactly. Resources are abundant because of the disturbance, but the limiting factor is time and speed. The race is on to capture the space.
And annual weeds dominate these early phases, aggressive, fast-growing species like crabgrass or ragweed.
And these plants are often specialists in chemical warfare, releasing high concentrations of allelopathic compounds directly into the soil to suppress the germination and growth of any potential neighbors.
Locking down their patch of turf. Richard Hobbs's 2024 studies confirmed that soil from these newly abandoned fields shows overwhelming concentrations of these quick-acting toxic compounds.
They are built entirely for speed and short-term, zero-sum dominance.
But that system is inherently leaky and unsustainable. Annuals die back every year. They fail to establish deep soil structure, organic matter, or accumulated resources.
Which leads to the turning point. The beginning of the facilitation cascade with the arrival of the perennial species, the slower, longer-lived grasses, fescues, and most importantly, the legumes.
And the establishment of legumes fundamentally alters the constraint on the ecosystem. By partnering with nitrogen-fixing bacteria, they begin pumping bioavailable nitrogen into the soil.
David Tillman's long-term research demonstrated that in fields where these perennial legumes established, soil nitrogen levels increased dramatically, sometimes by 40 to 60% within the first decade.
This is that active resource subsidy operating at a large scale. It transforms the entire resource gradient.
And the legumes are slower, less aggressive competitors initially, but their systemic gift of fertility lifts the constraint on growth for dozens of other non-fixing species.
So that subsidized fertility facilitates exponentially greater overall diversity, which in turn buffers and stabilizes the entire ecosystem against future stress.
And this pattern progresses through the nurse plant effect. Pioneer herbs and grasses build the initial soil structure, but the next wave, mid-successional shrubs like sumac or dogwood, thrives in the conditions created by the herbs.
Then the shrubs create the necessary microclimates, deep shade, reduced wind stress, increased humidity that are required for vulnerable, slow-growing tree seedlings to establish and survive.
It's an act of evolutionary altruism, or maybe just pragmatism, because the pioneers, the legumes and shrubs, will eventually be overtopped and shaded out by the very species they sheltered.
They're trading their own long-term dominance for short-term success and rapid reproduction.
Their strategy works because they thrive in disturbed environments and ensure their genes persist by facilitating the next, more complex stage of the ecosystem.
And Robin Chasden's research found that in tropical secondary forests, tree seedling establishment was up to 80% higher in areas with established shrub cover. It demonstrates the necessity of this facilitated pathway.
But even in the final complex stage, the mature tropical forest, the system requires an active control mechanism to enforce diversity and prevent competitive exclusion.
Which could lead to monoculture dominance and fragility.
Exactly. Which brings us to the elegantly cruel mechanism of the negative feedback loop known as the Jansen-Connell effect.
This effect operates by using localized disease pressure to police biodiversity. You have to explain the mechanism, because it's a perfect example of a system using hostility to achieve stability.
It relies on soil memory. A mature tree accumulates species-specific pathogens, specialized root-feeding nematodes, and highly adapted fungi in the soil immediately surrounding its base.
And this specialized hostile biota is harmless to other species, but lethal to the tree that hosts it.
And crucially to its own offspring.
So if a parent tree drops a seed directly beneath its canopy, that seedling faces mortality rates that are exponentially higher than a seedling of a different species that lands in the exact same spot.
The soil remembers which species grew there and actively penalizes repetition.
Liza Kamita's work highlights this as a primary non-conscious driver of the staggering species richness in tropical forests.
It is. This localized hostility forces conspecific trees to space out, creating gaps that must be filled by other species. This prevents any single species from achieving system-destabilizing dominance.
It's cooperation achieved not through sharing, but through enforced restraint and decentralized policing, driven by specialized enemies.
It's an anti-monopoly mechanism built right into the foundation of the soil.
So we have traced the architectural sophistication of coexistence, from niche division and resource subsidy to network governance and dynamic regulation. And all of this is managed by organisms that lack a central nervous system.
Which leads us to the final, most complex aspect, the emergent properties of distributed memory and collective intelligence.
How does a plant system learn, coordinate, and remember without a brain?
This is where we enter the realm of plant neurobiology, or perhaps more accurately, plant electrical and hydraulic signaling. We have to revisit Monica Galliano's 2008 Mimosa pudica experiment.
The sensitive plant. It folds its leaves rapidly when touched, as a defense mechanism.
And Galliano subjected the plants to repeated harmless drops.
And the extraordinary observation was that by the fourth or fifth drop, the plants just stopped responding. They learned to distinguish a threat from a benign disturbance.
But what was truly astonishing was that they remembered this distinction, this learned behavior, for weeks, even after environmental variables were changed.
Which defies classical botanical assumptions. Learning and memory require encoding information.
They do. And while plants don't have neurons, they utilize electrical signaling analogous to action potentials in animals and fast-moving calcium waves to coordinate rapid responses across tissues.
Information also travels slowly via pressure changes and chemical messengers in the phloem.
Right. But how is long-term memory encoded? And where? We have two leading complementary hypotheses that push us beyond the single organism view. The first is epigenetic memory,
which involves chemical modifications to the plant's DNA structure, like methylation. It doesn't change the genetic code itself, but alters which genes are expressed.
And these modifications persist through cell divisions. They're used to track long-term environmental events, like tracking the necessity of a sustained cold period vernalization before flowering. It allows the plant to integrate large-scale climate information over a long time horizon.
But the second, and arguably the more exciting possibility for system-wide memory, is distributed network memory.
Tying directly back to the mycorrhizal infrastructure, Simard's 2025 research provides crucial evidence here.
What did she find?
She observed that trees that had previously received carbon support from a neighboring birch, even years prior, maintained physically stronger and more dense fungal connections to those specific birches, even when the immediate resource flow had reversed or ceased.
So the memory of the successful past exchange wasn't stored in the individual tree's cell walls.
It was encoded in the physical pattern and functional strength of the connections across the fungal network.
That is a staggering realization. The memory, therefore, is an emergent property of the network architecture itself. It's directly analogous to how neural networks or computer systems store memory in the weighted strengths of synaptic connections.
The network remembers which relationships were productive and reliable, and it sustains those pathways for future use.
And this collective network intelligence is critical for enabling adaptive plasticity, the ability of the community to respond to novel stresses, like rapid climate shifts, faster than generation-by-generation evolution allows.
Let's look at the climate response. The timing of autumn senescence, when trees withdraw nutrients from their leaves before dropping them, was historically viewed as being fixed primarily by day-length cues.
But Andrew Richardson's 2024 work reveals a far more sophisticated integration process.
Trees are now exhibiting significant adaptive plasticity. They're adjusting the timing of senescence based on integrating multiple variable cues, day length, falling temperature, and crucially, localized water availability.
So in warmer, wetter autumns, trees are retaining their leaves longer to optimize carbon extraction.
And the key is that in a mixed species community, this optimization process becomes coordinated and collective.
The coordinated restraint observed during the extended European droughts of the 2010s and 2020s is perhaps the sharpest example. Mixed species forests, oaks, pines, and beech showed similar coordinated shifts in stomatal behavior.
They were closing pores earlier and reducing evapotranspiration simultaneously.
Henrik Hartmann's 2025 research suggested that this synchronized response points to a form of social learning.
Right, that species were signaling successful water conservation strategies to their neighbors, potentially through reduced water tension in the shared soil or through root-to-root chemical messengers.
And the result is that coordinated restraint benefits the entire community by preserving shared soil moisture levels, buffering the forest against the localized effects of extreme drought.
This coordinated behavior brings us right back to the core system analysis. Cooperation isn't just viable, it represents the Nash equilibrium in the long term for these biological systems.
Absolutely. I mean, plants are incredibly long-lived organisms. They repeat interactions with the same neighbors and the same fungal networks for decades, sometimes centuries.
In this context, the long-term iterated game defection or ruthless exploitation offers a powerful short-term gain.
But that short-term gain actively and measurably contributes to community collapse. Accelerated soil degradation, the loss of crucial fungal networks, increased vulnerability to pathogens.
Therefore, the long-term systemic cost of defection is exponentially greater than any immediate benefit. Cooperation, characterized by regulated resource subsidy, communication, and shared memory, emerges not through conscious choice or altruism,
but as a stable, mutually self-interested strategy enforced by the decentralized network infrastructure.
But just as they built it, the network can be broken.
Precisely. This functional equilibrium is demonstrably fragile. When system stability is rapidly broken by non-natural high-intensity disturbances like clear-cut logging, sustained human-driven pollution, or extreme rapid climate change, the expectation of a future payoff for cooperation just vanishes.
When the time horizon shortens radically, plants revert back to pure, short-term competitive strategies. The connections are severed and the collective system fails, leading to rapid biodiversity loss. #tag outro.
We began with a paradox of hundreds of species coexisting in a single square meter, which classical ecology suggested should be impossible. Our deep dive into the source material has shown us that plants moved from the zero-sum constraints of pure competition to highly stable positive-sum strategies by implementing multiple interlocked layers of systemic regulation.
These strategies include the elegant functional separation of niche differentiation to solve the packing problem, the active investment of resource subsidies like the legume's nitrogen gift to create stable, fertile foundations,
the implementation of sophisticated governance through fungal networks that enforce reciprocity and punish exploitation, and the emergent intelligence derived from distributed information sharing and network memory.
The spectacular diversity and sustained stability of complex ecosystems, from the tropical canopy to the mature forest floor, is anything but accidental. It is a functional architecture. It's an emergent property created by these accumulated, non-conscious strategies of sharing, restraint, and collective investment.
Cooperation in this context is measurable, quantifiable infrastructure. It makes the collective system inherently more productive, resilient, and adaptively plastic than any collection of isolated competitors could ever be.
Plants solve the fundamental problem of persistence in a finite, crowded world through chemistry, networks, and feedback mechanisms, all without the need for consciousness, language, or institutional bureaucracy. They figured out that the optimal strategy for the long game is to stop fighting for localized dominance and start building a distributed community infrastructure that increases the survival odds of everyone connected to it.
We inherited this world which is fundamentally built on their solutions.
If simple, rooted life forms can achieve this level of sustainable coexistence and regulated ethical exchange, what does that imply about human challenges when we possess the advanced cognitive structures and language supposedly required for complex systems management? Perhaps the greatest lesson the forest floor can teach us is that the foundational principles of sustainable system design are not about power. They are about disciplined reciprocity and managed restraint. It is a lesson we have yet to truly internalize.